Hi, my name is Rivka, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about the holiday of Hanukkah. About 2,200 years ago, the Greeks ruled the land of Israel, and their leader was Antiochus IV, who liked to be called Antiochus Epiphanes, which means Antiochus, the Great One manifested. And his goal was to wipe out the Jewish religion, the Bible, and to assimilate everyone into the Greek culture. And by doing this, he set up lots of rules and decrees that people had to follow. Those included no studying of the Bible, no keeping of the Sabbath or the festivals, no sacrificing to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and various other things were not able to be followed. Instead, he wanted them to worship pagan gods. And in 168 BC, he sent mercenaries into the temple and set up a statue of the Greek false god Zeus and told all the Jewish people that they had to worship him and sacrifice to him or be put to death in a very brutal way. And while people were standing around deciding, am I going to be put to death or am I going to sacrifice to this pagan god, a man by the name of Matthias from the town of Modin and his 5 sons stood firm and said, we are not worshiping a pagan god. We are only worshiping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel. And one Jewish man stepped forward because he was afraid, and he thought, I'll worship this false god and live. So Matthias stepped forward and thrust his sword into him and killed him and said, it is better to die than to worship a false god. So these led off several events which took place over the next 3 years. There were many battles, a lot of fighting. Judah, the oldest son of Matthias, became the leader, and he was called Judah the Maccabee. And he led this little army of Jewish soldiers and battled until 165 BC, which is when they entered the city of Jerusalem and were able to deliver and liberate the temple and the Jewish people from the Greek oppression. But when they went into the temple, they found it utterly destroyed, meaning the altar was broken down. The Greeks had sprinkled pig's blood, which is unkosher. They had sprinkled it throughout the temple, and it was in great disarray. So the people quickly started repairing the temple, getting it cleaned up, and consecrating it unto the Lord. And there's a little thing called the Ner Tamid, which means the eternal flame or eternal candle, which was to always burn in the temple. And they only found one little vial of oil that was appropriate for that task. These vials would be purified oil, and then they would be sealed by the high priest, sanctifying it, consecrating it just for that Ner Tamid in the temple. So they lit the one little piece that they have, the little vial that they had of the oil, and what they found was, according to the story, that a miracle took place and that one vial that was only supposed to burn for 1 day burned for 8 days. And during that time period, then they were able to make more purified oil for the temple. So really, the story of Hanukkah has 2 major points to it. First is the story of the miracle of the oil, but even more so is the victory that God gave the Jewish people over their oppressors. And it just showed that it's not the number of people who are fighting, but it's that they're fighting with God, on God's side, and that God is with them. So no matter how big or small or powerful or weak, God can use anyone to bring about his will. And this is a great opportunity for us to think about serving God and being on his side and being in the victory with him. I'd like to also share that in the book of John in the New Testament, in chapter 10, it says that Jesus went up to the temple at the Feast of Dedication, and it was winter. And the word for dedication in Hebrew is Hanukkah. So we find that in John chapter 10, Jesus went up and celebrated Hanukkah. So that's a good example for us. Now, you may be wondering how the Jewish people today celebrate Hanukkah. And one of the ways is by having what is called a Hanukkah, which has 8 branches along here, and then a 9th one, which is called the Shamash, which is the helper. And so each night we add another candle that we light, and that is one of the ways, and we set it in a window to be an example, to be a beacon of light, and to remind people of what God has done. Another thing we do is we have what's called a dreidel, and we have the dreidel game, which was devised to help people have a distraction from when they were studying the Torah. If one of the Greeks were coming in to check on them to see what they were doing, they would just start spinning the dreidel and get their attention and say that they were playing a dreidel game. We also eat foods which are cooked in oil, such as donuts and latkes. Now, latkes are a kind of fried potato, which would be similar to hash browns. So I hope that this has given you a little bit more information about Hanukkah than what you knew already, and that it will encourage you to be a light to the world.